rising lumber costs and just inflation in general, you might be wondering, is there any other sort of building material that I can use for pole buildings and building fence posts and things like that? And even before the ridiculous lumber prices started, one of my favorite building materials has been locust posts for years. I mean, they'll last for years, and they're hard as nails, and whatever part of them that you don't use, you can cut into firewood. Another benefit of the locust posts is you can keep them to just the regular tree shape, like this one. I just peeled the bark off. Or you can cut them square on your sawmill, like this one. And depending how crooked the tree is, you might not be able to saw all of it square to the size that you're wanting, but that's fine. I just try to get whatever part I'm going to be nailing into. I try to get that square, and the rest of it doesn't really matter. Depending on what part of the country you're in, you may have an ant problem. I know in this part of Pennsylvania, it seems like the carpenter ants just love locust trees, and almost every locust tree I cut, whether it's green or it's dead, has carpenter ant damage of some sort. So if I'm just using them for fence, there can be a lot of carpenter ant damage and you're fine. As far as buildings, I tend to not use them as much for buildings. Just, obvious reasons for, structural integrity and like that. But with the load bearing of a fence just mostly being from the side and not so much from the side and top like a building, like this one, this is for a gate. You see some heavy ant damage there, but it's up high enough. Once I attach the gate, I'm probably just going to end up cutting it at an angle, and then it'll be fine after that. Another thing you may find with locust posts that it's really not an issue for the most part is there's gaps from knot holes or maybe where the ants have eaten. But I mean, this one goes in a few inches. A lot of times I'll get just the hammer, or just, you can even smack with your hand. I mean, this is pretty solid. Right here, a little bit of a hollow sound. That's very solid. And that's very solid. This is going to have a corner brace, and it's not going to have a bunch of weight on top. Even if it was a small pole building, small shed, I'd still use something like this. It's not going to hold water, it's going to shed water. And I've had these posts in other areas of the farm for years, and there's never been any issues with that. So it's something that I think it gives the wood character. And also here you can see a bit of a gap, a little bit of punkiness. Again, it's solid. These locust posts, I'm telling you, locust trees will lay on the forest floor for years, and they don't rot. I like to try to peel as much of the bark off as I can. Sometimes the little gaps and things like that, you can't get all of it, but overall, I try to peel it. Is it easier to saw it on a sawmill? Yeah. Whenever it's a thinner log and I want a certain width of it, like this one, if I'd saw it on a sawmill, it would be too thin, so I just leave the bark on it. Plus, I just like how they look. And their tree shape, I just think that's neat looking. Before the ridiculous rise in lumber prices, I did have a couple buildings built using pressure treated lumber just out of ease, and I was having trouble finding locust trees tall enough for the size building that I wanted. But even with pressure treated, you can see there's even defects here. You got some fissures here. You got cracks along the knot holes here. So it looks like here a worm had eaten that. So that's why I don't let defects on a locust post bother me, because you can spend a ton of money. I don't even remember what this one cost, but you can spend all that money at the lumber store and still end up having defects. So this is an example of posts for a gate that we built, I think 2 years ago now. And there's a gap there. It's fine. I've had no issues. One of the things with tacking in your spikes for your fence is locust is very hard. The nails tend to bend, so just nail in a couple. This one, when they're dead, a lot of times the bark just falls off them. You don't got to use the draw knife. You can see then, I like to cut it at an angle just to kind of shed that water off. And then I like to use the locust as the side brace. Sometimes I'll cut stuff square, or just use, if it's a small enough tree, I'll just use the regular shape of the tree. Sometimes I'll use white oak and other types of wood, cross brace. I think this one, I'm not sure if this one was locust, I don't remember. And then you just use the number 9 wire and your tighteners. You just set all that up as you would just with your regular posts that you would buy from the store. Use a drill the holes for the hangers, because it's a son of a gun trying to just twist them in there. But they're solid. I mean, this thing's solid. Pretty much all the lumber that I used for this head gate slash little manger, sawed on the sawmill. Used locust posts. The poles here you can see, sawed on the sawmill. Part of it's square, and then parts that were crooked weren't. So just try to align up where I tack the boards onto. Try to make that flat. And it's solid. These cows, I mean, they really pull one whenever they're trying to get the hay there. They just, especially if they lock their horns onto the head gate there, I mean, they'll really pull. So I didn't use any concrete, I just used gravel. Tamp it in real tight, and it's very solid. And this is a couple years old. I think this post here, it's mostly all squared up on the sawmill. It was a big one, because sometimes these trees are so big they just won't fit down into the hole that you drill. So just running on the sawmill. That little knot there, it's a little punky. Overall, it's very solid. So there's not much weight on it. I'm not too worried. I mean, it's just, again, a son of a gun to try to drill holes through for your mounting brackets. Most of the posts I used in the barnyard here, I didn't cut at an angle because I was undecided whether I was going to add anything on top. And then I got, I think, oak sideboards. Built this, I think 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago. Cross braces were oak. The boards are oak. You can see I painted. Paint didn't really stick too much, but I mean, the locust boards are fine, or locust posts are fine. Oak boards are kind of starting to get a little punky here, so might replace that with some locust. But I mean, this thing's still solid as can be. And even being twisted, to get a little flat edge, use the chainsaw, get a little flat edge for the cross brace there. So that's an option right here. Did the same thing, carved a flat edge with the chainsaw. A lot of times the posts are crooked. You can still use them. Just try to align the part that you need, try to align that straight with a level. There was an old locust tree here that we used to attach the side of the gate to and part of the barnyard. It was pretty rough looking. The ants have been hammering it. I don't know how old it was. And then I just decided to just go ahead and cut the middle of it. That way, if we got a heavy windstorm or snowstorm or something like that, it just wouldn't bust and maybe land on the fence. So went ahead and cut it, I think, 1.5 years ago. And I've had to do that with a couple places that I've tacked into locust trees, tacked the fence into. And even when you cut them like that, if the bark's still on, a lot of times they're fine. It'll last a decade or more, probably more. And sometimes part of the reason why I do cut them too is they'll send shoots off. Like this one, it sends a shoot up. So this tree is still alive. And it's high enough out of reach for the cows. The cows love locusts for some reason, but it's high enough out of their reach. I'm hoping that it'll extend up, and then this tree will last for, you know, decades more. We used locust on the whole barn building here, and again, part of it we cut on the mill, part of it we left the shape of the tree. Parts that we tacked flat, we tried to saw them flat, but the size of this tree I couldn't cut the whole thing square, but you can see even with a rounded edge I'm still able to nail in good enough. And up here for the rafters and the joists and all that, still able to nail in. Again, locust is hard as a son of a gun, so sometimes your nails and your bolts and screws and stuff, I mean, if you don't drill a hole, sometimes they'll go in, sometimes they'll bend. And this pole here, it's crooked as a dog's hind leg, but you can still utilize it with a flat edge here and tack into. Curves that way, but it's fine because you kind of look down, and then as long as you have part of it that you nail into, as long as you can draw a straight line down, you can use these in construction. Rounded edge, still able to tack into. Rounded edge, still able to get the bolts into. And this side, I just tend to try to keep the outside of them where we're going to tack the boards into for the outer boards. I try to keep that flat. But you don't have to. You don't have to have all of it flat again. Like here, this is still the tree shape, and we're still able to make that work. A bit of a gap. It's still fine. It works. But here in this corner, I mean, most of this is still the regular log shape, and we're still able to utilize it to tack and screw other boards into, and it's fine. That part's flat and that's round. And up top there, you're able to get the bolts in. No problems. It's solid. I mean, this thing's solid as can be. And then it's very resistant to manure. Locust is very resistant to manure. So, no worries there. It's going to last longer than what the pine, even with it painted. I started trying to utilize locust trees like a crop. So, when you cut them, if they're still alive, they'll send the shoots out, like I was showing you on this one. And they'll also send runners. So where the roots have gone out, it sent this one up, which unfortunately it's in the way. We had to knock it down. They grow pretty fast. Sometimes you can trace it out. And this runner here, you can see it's a good 25 feet away, I'd say. It's in a hayfield, so I'm going to have to mow it down. But they'll send a ton of runners out. That's why when harvesting them, I'll try to find one that it's kind of rough looking. Carpenter ants have been hammering it, and so forth. And that way I can cut it, and it'll regenerate like that one over there. Or if there's one like this, nice and straight, doesn't look like the ants have been hammering this one, I'll just leave it. Along the edge of my fence line, along the edge of the hayfield, I've just been leaving the locust grow. And then hopefully in a few years, like this one, I'll just harvest it, some sort of post for a fence or a building. You can see right here, it's gotten hammered, so I might just end up cutting this one for firewood. Again, if it gets to looking too rough looking, I'll just cut it and it'll send those runners out, and then you just trim it, use it like a crop. And there's more growing along the fence line here. It's far enough away I don't hit them with the tractor. And this one, I left it grow. You can see it's a nice size now. It's pretty much ready. I could use it for posts. It's even with the lean here, there's still enough of a straight line. I could get a good 8-foot post out of it. The old timers, they like to use both locust and also chestnut before it was wiped out. And this post here, it's at least 100 years old. And you can see this is the fence that we put up a couple years ago. I didn't tack into this. It's a little loose. It's nearing the end of its age. So, but it's still being braced, even though it's not tacked in, it's still being braced a bit. And this fence, several decades old at least. And this, it's definitely very old. This post, it's still in really good shape. And this stuff will outlive freaking stuff you buy that's pressure treated, that's just been rushed through. I mean, look at that. I was looking at old aerial imagery from the 30s, and this farm had a fence row along here, and so this is at least from like 1930 something. So in my opinion, locust will outdo the pressure treated any day. I built this tool shed within the past year, so some of these buildings I've hired others to, and others it's been me and Dad. This one, me and my wife. I'm not a carpenter, but I figured it's a small enough building that if I'm off square, off plumb and all that, it's small enough that it's not gonna make that big of a deal. So it's a little off, but I can show you here using locust. This one, I just peeled the bark. I didn't try to square most of it up, only one side. And I was able to tack boards on, no issues. Placing boards on top, I just get a chainsaw, just cut me a little section out there. Same thing there. Just place the boards on top. So the left side of this is relatively straight, and the right side is crooked. So I try to just align everything to where I'm going to be nailing it. It's on the straight side. If neither side is straight, at least if that middle, like some of the other I was showing you up here, you got from the middle down, it's straight. And the left side's relatively straight, so this worked. I can use this for a building and not just for a fence post. The posts that are really crooked, I use them just for random sturdying posts, like some of the fence out in the distance there. I've been building with locust for at least the past 12 years on fence posts, buildings, and all that, and I've never had any issues with it, other than just trying to pound a nail into it or something like that and it bending. That's it. Other than that, I've never had them break, never had them rot, nothing. Never had any, after I've installed them, never had any additional bug damage, anything like that. Never had the woodpeckers come after them. Just, they've been solid and zero issues. And if lumber prices come down again, they may or may not, but in the event they do, either way, whether it's cheaper, whether it's more expensive to build with locust, like most of this stuff I've saved, man, I mean, not counting the lumber that I've sawed on the mill myself, but just the locust poles myself that I've used, I mean, it's saved me at least, man, thousands of dollars, because on this farm and the other farm, I mean, we've installed quite a few locusts, and it's like, I mean, it's more work. You got to cut them. If there's bark on it, whether it's green or dead, you know, getting the draw knife and cutting the bark off, there's the work there. If you don't mind that, and you know, really all it costs you is your time, and it'll last decades at least.